Oh, there you are.
Perfect. Oh, okay.
I can switch spots with you. You want to switch?
Sure.
Musical chairs.
Just as
interested in
Right. Why did every veil? This is too high, this is too low.
Are we recording?
Yeah.
Musical chairs. Everyone got their seats?
Yep,
I think so. We have recording.
9:17.
Okay, calling the meeting to order.
Second.
Yeah.
It's been so long since I've been here. It's done.
We have meeting minutes.
Okay, and now we're gonna consider the meeting minutes. Is there any discussion?
Motion
Questions?
to approve.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Minutes from the last meeting, which was November 4th, quite a while ago, are passed. And then now we'll hear from featured speaker team.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you all again. I think the primary purpose is to give you an update on the county's efforts to do affordable housing in the suburbs. And I know that that is passionate for everybody here. But really the point of doing that is to help with whatever your housing strategies might be going forward. There are some lessons learned from the county side of the equation that I think will be helpful as you design your strategy. So the county allocated a total of $15 million towards ARPA of the American Rescue Plan Act. That states, counties, and cities received funding and they could allocate it towards various efforts. And the county allocated $15 million towards affordable housing. 12 million of that was allocated towards affordable housing in Milwaukee County suburbs. And the Community Development Alliance that I worked for partnered with the county to issue that RFP. And it is a rolling RFP process, which means that unlike an RFP that has one deadline, developments come in staggered stages. So we set it up as a rolling RFP where at essentially the first Friday of any month, a qualifying developer can submit a proposal. So there have been 4 rounds at this point. The first round is in November of last year. And at this point, there's been a notice of intent to award for the full $12 million to 5 different projects throughout the county that really range in geography from Brown Deer to Tosa to Greenfield to South Milwaukee. So no real geographic consistency, pretty spread out. About half. You did not hear Shorewood. Yeah, so there are about half of those projects are contingent on getting low-income housing tax credits. And so those applications are now in. Those tax credit applications go to the state. So if those projects are successful in getting tax credits, then the $12 million has been allocated. If those projects are not successful, then there will be about $6 million that comes back into the pool in about July. So we're just going to keep that RFP open until there are no longer any contingent efforts that are out there. So what I wanted to do today was give you an overview of the projects that were successful so that you could have some sense of how that might inform your strategy. If we could just go to the next slide, Rebecca. So I thought about giving you all kinds of averages of projects, but I don't find that very helpful. It's better to just kind of visualize in your mind, what does one of these projects look like? This is an oversimplification, and the average project was integrated of affordable housing at the community level. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means, but I think that that's the biggest issue that you need to face in your affordable housing strategy, is that last time we were here, you all expressed a desire to have affordable housing integrated at the building level, meaning that if you had a building of 20 units, that you would want to see 4 of those units develop. And after seeing the projects that are successful, the primary successful projects were integrated at the community level, meaning that they were projects that had 80% affordable housing in the building. Now, the larger surrounding neighborhood and community didn't have affordable housing, so you still have the integration, but you're doing it at the integration at either the neighborhood or the community level rather than the building level. And that turned out to be the primary difference. There was only one project that integrated at the building level and had some major impacts on the local resources required. And so that is the primary learning lesson that I will talk a little bit more about. Also the average project utilized low-income housing tax credits. I don't know how much you guys have talked about tax credits, but tax credits are a tool that are allocated by the federal government. Each state has a limited amount of those tax credits, and there's a competitive process every year. And in that competitive process, it's a risky proposition. Maybe about 1 in every 5 projects actually gets tax credits. Shorewood is actually, fairly well positioned to score pretty well. And there's a lot of scoring value added to, strength of school district and strength of economy and things like that. So most of the projects utilize low-income housing tax credits, and of the developers, there was only one nonprofit tax credit developer. The remaining ones were for-profit tax credit developers. And then the average building was about 4 stories with about 80 units of housing. So the average building is about 4 stories with 80 total units, which is a substantial building. I mean, that's a pretty big building, and averaged about 80% of those 80 units. So about 60 of the 80 units were affordable housing units, and of those affordable units, about a third of them were at $650 of rent per month, about a third at $1,000, and about a third at $1,250. Sorry about the technology issues here. Some other things just to note is that the average cost per unit was about $300,000, which is substantial. And I'm sure Tom and others can tell you about how construction costs are going up. Yeah, it is.
For an apartment unit, that's $300,000.
$300,000 per unit.
I can build a house for less than that.
Is that multiplied by 80? Is that what we're?
Yeah, so $24 million project was the average.
Wow.
So we have 2 projects going in, one at like 39, the other one at 43 on 4 floors.
Yeah.
So these buildings must be the lots must be much larger, or the units would have to be so small.
Or the building's really tall.
4 floors.
Oh, right. So in these, and they're 4 floors, right?
So
So
it must be a pretty big footprint.
It's a big footprint.
Or,
not micro units.
or are the finishes in the units, like is the selections part of the,
Not really. No real. Those driving that cost is construction cost per square foot in a multifamily building.
And they, obviously, the places you chose have available land, lots that are that big. So that, it'd be twice the footprint of the buildings we have, 4 floors.
Yeah, but it's also, your buildings could go higher, right? Like that's a policy decision,
Yeah.
right? I think that's the
Some
other
people
big,
only want.
that's your big policy decision, is that you don't have land width wise, but you have a lot of demand to build up. And so if you limit your, demand to build up, then you're going to limit the number of units that you can put in.
And so cost wise, cheaper to go up or find a place that's got more land footprint.
Well, for you, it's cheaper to go up because you don't
Why do
have.
these other communities get it? We do. I guess that's what, so these other communities are getting 4 stories, 80 units. They're getting new units.
Well, maybe we could get into those discussions after we hear the presentation.
And so then you get to public subsidy per unit. So of that 300 per unit cost, essentially the entire cost has to be covered by the public sector, particularly for the units that are $650 or less, because the operating costs of keeping the apartment building running are about $650 per unit per month. And so you have to basically collect the rent to pay the operating costs. And so you can't carry debt on a lot of these units. So the average public subsidy was about 280,000. Now, if you bring in tax credits are bringing in 240,000 of that 280,000. That's how powerful low-income housing tax credits are. And so the local subsidy then that's required from the county side on the ARPA was only about $40,000 per unit. So that's the general project. And I think it'd be good to quickly go through that there was one outlier where there are some lessons learned, and then we can kind of go back to this and have a conversation about it. So if we go to the next slide, and I tried to highlight something similar here. So there's one project, Cornerstone Village on 76th and North in Wauwatosa, that was actually integrated at the building level. So that was the big difference of this project, is it was allocated at the building level, and it did not utilize low-income housing tax credits. And those two things probably come together. If you decide to focus on a building level strategy, it's going to be very hard to utilize low-income housing tax credits.
Can you explain that to me, building level? What is that?
Yeah, so it essentially means that in that project, instead of having 80% affordable housing, essentially the whole building is affordable housing, they had 20% affordable housing.
Okay.
So they had 20% affordable, 80% market
And
rate.
is that that's the line right there to make it?
Well, so
In this case.
well, so there's lots of interesting policy issues here. So let's talk through a couple of them. So one is that it would be, I've never seen a tax credit development only have 20% units. So it's really hard to use tax credits to do anything other than 80% affordable.
Wait, what about the libraries?
I don't know enough about that one.
Oh, well, it is integrated at the building level, had tax credits, and I think it's only 20% of the units are low income.
But I don't think it got income. Yeah, that was a long time ago, and I don't think it got the low income. housing tax
It's
credit.
got those,
America, Butterback.
got a tax credit.
I see.
Different kind of tax credit.
BBB bonds?
Yeah, build back better.
BBB bonds.
There you go, thank you.
But you should look for those examples, but certainly it hasn't happened in Wisconsin's recent history. So, and those two things probably come together. If you decide that you're going to try to do integration at the building level and only have 20% affordable units instead of 80, then you're probably taking tax credits off the table. And then the resources have to come from somewhere, right? So there are other differences, and I want to jump down to that difference. You notice the big difference, the cost per units were still roughly the same. The public subsidy required was still roughly the same, but tax credits got taken off the table. And so the entire $280,000 subsidy per unit had to come from the local community, right?
Is that 280 of the 20% of the units, or $280 for all the units in the building?
No, just for the affordable units.
Okay.
Just for the 20% of affordable units.
Got it.
And so in this circumstance, functionally, it was half TID assistance. So TID assistance of $140,000 per unit, matched by county ARPA assistance of $140,000 per unit. And that was a significant policy decision that came up at the board level. There was one supervisor that was like, why are we spending $140,000 on one unit where all of these other ones are only requiring $40,000?
See, just so I have it straight in my head. So as local subsidy would be TID and public subsidy would be ARPA. Is that
No, so public subsidy means all public subsidy, right? Like, in order to build an affordable unit in a multifamily building right now, it's going to cost you $300,000, and you're going to need $280,000 of public assistance, either from the city, county, state, fed.
okay?
Right? And so that's one interesting thing to look at. Like, does a change in strategy result in a different number, of subsidy? The local subsidy is, if you take tax credits out of the equation, how much does the local community have to come up with?
Okay, so public subsidy is kind of an umbrella and local subsidies, almost a subset of public subsidy.
Correct. And in this example, 100% of the public subsidy has to be local.
Got it. Okay, I got it.
So, and in this particular development, if there's 18 units, 19 units? that
Correct.
are- Okay.
Yeah, so that's the other big difference. They had 20% instead of 80%. They needed to build a bigger building. They went 5 stories to get to their 94 units. And then interestingly, they were able to actually include more lower income units. Remember, the last one was sort of a third. This one, they were able to focus on the lower ones. And so just quickly on this, building level integration thing, just a couple of visuals to think through this on your strategy. And if we could just go to the next slide. So this, I think, is the biggest policy decision for you guys to make, is that from the examples we have now and from some other, examples, nationwide, if you're going to do affordable housing at the building level integration, the buildings typically are larger and they require a higher local subsidy, and there's fewer pool of developers that can pull them off. Particularly in the Wisconsin market. And this gets to the question that was asked earlier about sort of, is this just this example or otherwhere? In other communities, they've had decades of a tool that the Wisconsin state legislature took away from all of you. And that tool was that in high market areas, you could give a density bonus to a project and require that a certain percentage of the units be affordable housing. You want a building in DC and New York, where the market is really, really hot. You can only build 50 units, but you want to build 500 units. The community can say, yes, go ahead, build 500 units as long as you build 20% of them affordable. And so you have such high market rents in those areas, such high potential profit margins in those areas. You have developers that have actually had the experience to be developing 20% of those units. That's not a thing in Wisconsin. We haven't built up that capacity in the market, and we don't have the same rents that DC and Boston and everybody else has. So it's really, really hard to do. So one strategy to consider is, as an example, doing it at the neighborhood level. So you see that subset of buildings there, and you have 8 buildings there, or in my county, 7 buildings there, but one of them is the affordable housing building. And it looks just like all the other ones. And then that unit that has the green box around it, that one becomes the tax credit development, 80% affordable. You have more flexibility in the building size. You can lower your local subsidy. You have a bigger pool of developers that would be interested in, but tax credits are very competitive. It's not a for sure thing, right? So that is a gamble to that. And then there's this idea of, do you do it even at a bigger scale? And if just go to this last slide, and then I'll break for questions here, and I have some data to show you. But you can also look at it at a community level integration, right? So instead of just looking at one block, you say, we want this section, this section, this home, and the affordable mix is very flexible. You're not stuck in the 20 or 80% realm anymore. The number and size of buildings is flexible. You have a couple of different subsidy options. You have a bigger pool of developers, but the thing you need to do that is land.
Yeah.
Right?
That's probably better for coming.
Yeah,
Can you take a community like ours and identify homes in the community right now?
You could, yeah. It could be an acquisition strategy to acquire homes and preserve them for affordability. We're getting, there's so much repurposing of land, right? Like freeways are coming down, old school properties, old malls, and where the demand is housing. You guys, again, have created this policy decision that you're not going to take advantage of the space going up, right? But that's your biggest opportunity to do something like this. So there's all of those options to look in a community. So anyhow, I think to the extent that this last round of applications is instructive to your strategy going forward, I think the biggest decision is that building neighborhood or community level integration.
All five of these, I'm assuming, are new construction projects.
All five of the ones that received a notice of intent to award were new construction, yes.
Can you speak to whether or not any applications were of remodeling existing buildings?
None of the applications.
Do you know why that would be? Is that just not really done, or?
I think we saw a lot of rehab using tax credits in the last 2 decades. So the opportunities were limited. And remember, this was just for suburban areas. And so taking a big industrial building and converting it, a lot of that stuff got done on like Mitchell Street in Milwaukee, Fifth Ward, Third Ward. You don't have a lot of big, old, underutilized buildings in the suburbs.
What about taking a big old apartment building?
Yeah.
Is that done?
Oh, absolutely. There's
We have a lot of those.
Yeah, there's a separate actual set aside for essentially, preservation of buildings. We can get tax credits for existing buildings for sure. You always, in that circumstance, you always have to, it's about tenant transition, right? It's very, very hard when you're using federal subsidy. They require you to have a relocation plan, which really is so cost prohibitive that you can't kick people out.
Yeah.
You really need to, have a plan to either phase people out or buy an empty apartment building if you're going to go that strategy.
Right.
Or have people that already had that income. So I do have some data for you guys. We created a housing dashboard to provide some more detail to communities. And we can go back to any of these questions, but so what this graphic is, hard to see on the smaller screen here, so I'll walk you through it.
Full screen.
If you go to, no, that's for Teams.
Full screen?
No, that's for Teams. It's in PowerPoint. You got to go to Preferences and take off Presenter mode. So if you just go under, I think, File, go to maybe Options, Preferences, and then be something for Presenter mode. I don't know why Microsoft makes it so difficult for you. Tried to look it up as we were talking here. On the PowerPoint menu, select Preferences. The PowerPoint Preferences dialog box. Under Output and Sharing, click Slideshow. Maybe just type Preferences in the box on top.
You went to language preferences.
Oh.
I don't think there was a preferences that showed up. Only language preferences. Jeez.
Well, that's right. We can script.
Yeah.
Or just leave it, it up as you had it right there. Just pull up the draft. I don't know if people online will be able to see it as well. And yeah, just go scroll down to that first bar chart. All right, so what this graphic shows is the blue line shows how many families you have at each income level that can afford certain rents. So that first blue dot is 114 families living in Shorewood that
This is Shorewood specific.
this is Shorewood specific for less than $250. That's what they can afford. Very, very, very low income. You have 414 families that can afford $650 per month. So that's what the blue line represents. And what the red line represents is the number of units that you have. I'm sorry, I screwed that up.
It's opposite.
The opposite. The red line is the number of families that you have at certain income levels. So you have 337 families that can only afford $250 a month or less. You have 657 families that can afford $650 or less. The blue line represents the number of housing units that you have that can be afforded by that income level. So anytime you have a red line above a blue line, you have more families than you have available units. And so you can see, and this is true in every area of the county, and in 50 of the 72 counties in Wisconsin, you have more families that are making $15 an hour or less that need a unit of housing that's $650 or less, and there are so few units available to them. So you have a gap of about 450 units of housing that you need of $650 or less. And just like nearly every other place, you have a gap on the entire other end of the income spectrum. You have 828 families living in Shorewood that can afford $2,000 a month or more in rent, and you only have 119 units available for them.
Let's get to work.
Sorry,
guys.
And so-
Triggering people.
Well, you would just take that 700 gap minus the 2 units or the 2 buildings, right? Yeah, so you'd still have a gap of about 600. There's many of us that believe that that gap on the right-hand side is actually a lack of single-family home inventory. You have people that can afford to buy a home at a reasonable price. There's no inventory, so they're forced into the rental market. So that's one thing to consider. One thing that's kind of, if you go to the next slide, Rebecca, if you look at this trend over time, there's something very severe going on in Shorewood. And so the red line, again, is the number of families that you have at the income level that can afford $650 or less. And you've lost about 500 of your population. So about a third of your population no longer lives in Shorewood. And now whether those, they moved out, whatever else the case may be, maybe they got higher incomes, so you could think about it positively. We can't track that. You just have less people, but look at how many units you've lost. And in 2010, you had 1,000 units of housing that were at $650 or less, and you've lost 528, or you're down to 528 units.
Does that count for the duplex conversion? Like, would this count duplexes, or is this just like?
This counts all rental units,
Okay.
right? So it doesn't include home ownership units, and it's all done through census data.
It's adjusted at all for inflation.
Yeah.
It is not adjusted for inflation.
Because, I mean, rents going up in general is going to probably attribute to most of that.
Yeah, and if you had parity of income and rent going up at the same time, you'd see that red line
that
and
would
blue
be-
line flat.
Flat, yeah.
Right?
Right.
But what you see here is that rents have gone up. Maybe incomes have gone up and people have priced out, but your gap has gotten, a little bit bigger. You used to have a gap of about 485 units, and now you're at about 550.
I think, we stopped at 2020. I would love to see 2021 to 2022.
We would love to see that too.
I would assume that that's even a bigger difference
Yeah.
there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
More severe after.
Well, and I can, as a small landlord, I can probably speak to, especially the last 2 years, and I think this is happening in Shorewood, just anecdotally, just seeing what's happening. A lot of the duplexes in Shorewood are owned by older individuals and maybe second, third generation people, and those are starting to turn over. And I know you see it when a duplex turns over, it probably was being rented for $750, $850 a month. A 2-bedroom in Shorewood, you can get $1,500, $1,600 easy for a 2-bedroom apartment. In
Yeah,
Shorewood.
and I would
If it's decent, it doesn't even have to be updated.
And I would look
because of
very,
demand.
I would look very closely at your property records and if those transitions are converting from one homeowner unit and a rental unit to converting to 2 rental units. I think that would be something to pay particularly close to, because that could actually start impacting your home ownership rate. Just quickly just to share some more data that's on the dashboard, and all this is live and we'll update it as soon as we have the 2021 and 2022 census data. So on the home ownership side, because we've been talking a lot about rental, but affordable home ownership is an affordable housing strategy. That gap on rental, those renters could be served in a rental unit or an affordable home. And so on the home ownership side, we look particularly at racial equity. And now you have a really big margin of error because you're a small community in census data. So you have to take a little bit of this with a grain of salt. But one thing that's interesting is that everywhere else in the county, the biggest racial equity gap we see is for Black families, and followed by Latino families. but you're one of the only communities where Asian families has a huge home ownership gap. So if you were to achieve racial equity, what this means is that you would, in order to have parity between the white home ownership rates and other home ownership rates by race, you would have 83 more Asian homeowners, 77 more Black homeowners, 13 more Latino homeowners. We also measure this over time to get some trend lines, which is, white home ownership rate has remained relatively stable over 2010 to 2020. Your Latino home ownership is kind of all over the map, and I think probably has to do with a large margin of error and a small population. But if you look at Black home ownership, first of all, you're really low to begin with, of 18%. At the county level, it's at 25, 30%. You're half of where else, and you are now in the 5%. You've, according to this data, have lost a significant amount of Black homeowners. So one of the things I would encourage you in strategy side of the equation, and this is my last slide here, is you can look at home ownership as affordable housing. And there's been some conversation about, could you acquire some land? Do you have land that you could repurpose, et cetera? And you might want to look at higher density construction options for housing. Row houses, condos, et cetera, can be a home ownership strategy. There are shared equity models, which is essentially a way to preserve affordable home ownership long term. The way a shared equity model works is you say, we spent $250,000 building this home. We're going to sell it to you for $150,000. That's a $100,000 subsidy. When you sell this home, you can sell it for, a part of that, but you can't just flip this house, right? We need to preserve affordability for future generations.
Does that hurt the generational wealth aspect of
Yeah,
owning
it
a
hurts.
house? I mean, because that's the point of, trying to own one of those homes, trying to own a home, building that equity, being able to sell it and then reinvest it. And then if you're not able to do that with the money, it defeats the purpose almost,
Well, so a couple things. Yes. I think the primary benefit of home ownership is knowing where you're going to live for the next 30 years,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And the stability it creates, knowing that your rent payment's not going to go up. There is a difference between generational wealth and intergenerational wealth. And the way that housing was built for baby boomers is that it focused on generational wealth. Baby boomers did incredibly well, generally speaking, with their homes. They built homes for $12,000. They're now worth $400,000, right? And now their kids, their grandkids, and their great grandkids can't afford homes.
Right.
And so it's a way to build intergenerational wealth, meaning preserving some affordability and some wealth building for all four generations, rather than one generation getting
Right.
all of the wealth.
Yeah.
So in those type of situations, because that, to me, that is the most, this type of affordable housing is what I am most interested in. And I feel like would fit our community best. And I would love to see us really kind of strategize on ways that we can make this happen. For me, the big roadblock that I immediately think of is our property taxes. Average property tax bill, I would guess, is about $9,000 a year. It depends on what these units are, what they would cost, but how do you help someone pay their, $900 a month escrow for a property tax?
Yeah, it's
So you
actually,
got a starter home cost of $300,000. Shorewood. Right. And then you have the,
More, a starter home in Shorewood?
we just sold an LGL.
so there's actually really good news here. And that really good news is that the agricultural community has been doing this for years, which is if you restrict the value of the property through a deed restriction and say, hey, my farmland can only be used for agricultural purposes, you then get taxed at a lower tax rate. And so our whole entire tax code, says that if you have a deed restriction on your property that limits the value, you can only assess it for that value. Here's how a row house development might work if you had land to do it, is that let's say your construction costs are $300,000 to build each unit. To make it affordable, it has to come down to $150,000 or whatever number you choose. So you're going to subsidize $150,000 per unit to make it happen through your existing TID or other TIDs. And then you essentially deed restrict it that says it can only be sold for $150,000. Now that's extreme, right? Because you want some wealth building opportunity. But then, as long as your assessor, is on board and, has the same understanding of the tax code as we do, then it gets assessed at 150,000 rather than the market value of that townhome, which would be $800,000, right? Because they can't sell it for 800,000, so it shouldn't be taxed at 800,000.
So
And
can I?
then, sorry, just one other
Yeah.
question. If we were looking at some option like this, are these available for the low income housing tax credit? Like, is that?
Yes, the low income housing tax credits require 15 years of rental. And so after 15 years of rental, they can be sold for affordable home ownership. So absolutely, you could do that, but the
Wait,
first
I'm
15
not-
years has to be rental.
Oh, I see. So it would have to be a development for 15 years that is your rental.
Yep.
And then could transition to home ownership.
Yeah.
But we could structure a deal that way, like if we have land to build a townhome, I'm.
Yes, yeah. And the same philosophy could work for condos as well. And my understanding of the condo development is that there's a very specific reason that all these apartments are getting built and rather than condos. It's because developers don't want to do condos because they are a headache and the standards of condo owners are so high. You have to figure out condo owners associations, et cetera, et cetera. But that would be your other option if you don't have vertical land, if you don't have horizontal land to focus on vertical land.
Quick question, could you, I'm building on that point, you talked about how Shorewood was well positioned for a tax credit. Could you give us a little bit more color around, if we decide to go with one of these options, say like neighborhood level integration, we're gonna apply for a tax credit. How is our community better positioned than others and what are the advantages there?
Yeah, so there's, this is gonna get a little nerdy, so follow with me just for a minute. There's the tax credits, there's a lot of flexibility in the way that tax credits get allocated by the state. They can't give themselves more tax credits, right? But they have flexibility in how they allocate them. And there's been a policy decision by the state to say that we want to focus on building affordable housing in already stable communities. And so they manipulate the application and the scoring mechanism to favor communities like Shorewood at the expense of communities that may not have the same level of income, the same level of schools, et cetera. So there's a specific scoring category that basically says if your school district is in the top 20 percentile, you get 5 points. And it's a way to say that we want to favor as a state, we would rather favor projects in communities like Shorewood rather than in Milwaukee. That has some pretty significant policy implications, but that's the status quo, is that you guys, because of those policy decisions, and their tax credit developers could show you the scoring between the two. And just to quickly flush this out, if you do go this direction, you just need to be very conscious of racial equity. I mean, a lot of this conversation started with you all because you wanted to boost the diversity of Shorewood. And if you do this and you're not careful, you're going to make the racial equity gap worse rather than better. If you were able to build a bunch of row homes and sell them for 150,000 and just whoever first come, first serve, there are a whole lot more white families that are
How do you
eligible.
limit that though? How do you?
So there's a lot of great tools to limit that are within the fair housing guidelines. So something simple like saying that this is only available for first generation home buyers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is to, and you can get even more aggressive if you want. The more aggressive you get, the more exposure, you open yourself to, but that would be a really big risk that you would want to mitigate.
So let's say first generation home buyer, we sell one of these row houses for $150,000, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. That row house now is $900,000. That family sells the home, they get $150,000. Where does the rest of that profit go? Does it go back to the community? Does it go back to?
So here's the basic answer to your question is that it's held by the public, right? Whoever gave the public subsidy, right, maintains that, and then they have a choice of, are they now going to give it to the next homeowner to preserve affordability, or are they going to cash out?
Yeah.
The primary way that's done is by something called the community land trust, which is essentially the public or a nonprofit owns the land and the person owns the building. And then you have a shared equity formula that in your example says, we're going to let you earn 3% appreciation each year. And so after 10 years, we're not gonna have you sell it for 150, we're gonna let you sell it for 225, right? And then the person that you sell it to has to be a qualifying home buyer. They have to be at $50,000 a year or less. They have to be a first generation.
You can tie future profits, let's say the $150,000, but we can tie certain escalators into that. So let's say, I don't want to give examples, but we could escalate that to $200,000 if we wanted to, $250,000 if they meet certain criteria throughout the way, maybe, or
Absolutely.
maintain the home a certain way, or I don't know. I don't want to put any kind of escalators on there, what they would be, but we can do that for them.
Yeah, as long as it's like income and housing related,
Yeah.
right? Like if you know, it would be, you have to send your kid to college, right? Like if you have something outside, it's not the way it's done,
It
right?
has to be about the home.
It has to be about the home. It's called, the term is shared equity. And I think if a community like Shorewood were to say, we want to do a shared equity model for affordable home ownership for racial equity purposes, I think you'd get some outside support. I don't think you'd have to do it by yourself. I don't know what that support looks like. I don't know if that looks like, helping homeowners with down payment assistance or helping with some of the capital costs or, but it would just be it would be an exciting model that I think people would be interested in.
Just that, building on trustee Ersing's point, I just want to kind of drill down on, I want to make sure deed restrictions don't just, when they're really restrictive, don't feel great to me. It just feels like you're taking away a lot of the benefits of home ownership. So based on what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of flexibility in how you write the deed restriction. For instance, you could say something like, we built this for 300,000, we're selling it for 150. Once that 150 is covered in the home equity, whatever you sell for above 3, you can keep. Something like that. I mean, you can write it kind of however you want to
write it however you want. And the balance is between how much wealth are you going to let this person build versus have affordability for the next person.
Right.
That's how you want to balance it.
Right. Okay.
So we have, this pot of money that we have been talking about for a long time, or what feels like a long time. Is there an expiration date on using that money? So really.
What are we talking about?
The TID money, yeah. So really, it would behoove us to take that money and try and figure out a way for us to apply for some low-income tax credit to sort of make the most of what we have. Like, it would go a lot further, obviously.
That would be a pivot, because right now we're doing rental offensive, right? So this is all totally pivoting from that, right?
Well, so low-income housing tax credits is rental, and it has to be rental for at least 15 years, but it could be rental long-term, or it could convert to home ownership. But yes, but in addition to pursuing tax credits, I think your primary barrier here is either vertical or horizontal land. And so I think that you can't really pursue tax credits until you have a site. And so you could use that money to buy a site, or you could look at your zoning code and in more vertical land, or you could look at any surplus land to gain more, horizontal land.
One site that I did, and this is totally conceptual, but I'm at 30,000 feet a lot, right? And just different things. I was talking to Teague because from a census tract perspective with the tax credits, there's a portion of the bill, like different areas for the tax credits rate higher than that, right? And so our public works site is in one of the most desirable for tax credits. And so I don't know. And again, well,
You're speaking my language.
okay, but okay, I know, but I'm not saying it because I'm on one thing or another. I'm just like, for me, it's a business model. So from coming to Shorewood and looking at the TID extension, it'd be my recommendation that the CDA recommends that every TID get extended for a year. And that money could also compile and fuel together. Because right now, 2 million sounds like a lot, but we understand the numbers that it's not. So it also is a lesson that if you want to continue to fuel that, TIDs aren't always bad, right? So sometimes TIDs get a really bad rap, but if you're going to fuel that, it's just the one, Mayor McBride, from Toso on the phone again yesterday. By the way, congratulations on being appointed to the Land Trust.
Tosa.
And very looking forward to learning from you and working with you. I was like, great appointment.
There's some arm twisting to get me to do it.
Oh,
It's the right
really?
thing to do. yeah,
Oh.
yeah. We're just very busy. I mean, that's the only aspect of it. But
Yeah.
what she's referring to is that TOSA is aggressively pursuing the land trust model that we just talked about, where the public or a nonprofit owns the land. And then, the person owns the building as a way to preserve affordability. But I interrupted, sorry.
No, so just like, so we're watching what Toast is doing, right? Because no one needs to recreate, well, Milwaukee is also, they said that like, early, like in the fall, winter, that they wanted to start, in fact, it's a tickler on my calendar right now to follow up with Caldini. They wanted to look at that from like Milwaukee County's perspective of like land trust, but they were really non-committal in terms of the timeline to do it. So my only point with talking about land trust is that it's easier to do it with a group of people who are all looking at it from a thoughtful direction. So it'd be great if we could do something countywide. Anyways, getting back to Public Works, it's just a fact that we know about the site. So that site is also included in TID 3. So, from TID 3, has availability to fund public infrastructure, but not necessarily our public services and stuff like that. So if we were to redevelop that site for a public works site, that could not fuel that. However, if there was a development there, and selfishly, but from my perspective, it's that wall and the utility lines, which is a disaster.
Well,
Yeah, if that site were to redevelop, could we invest from the TID to help? Because that's just it's gonna be a fortune for anyone redeveloping the site.
And I would just quickly add a third option when you're looking at land, which is you could do scattered site acquisition now and put it
Correct.
into a land trust.
Which is what Milwaukee County.
Yeah.
So another property that we've talked about a little bit was the property right behind the mobile station. And Downer, they've been looking at their foreclosed properties and have put them into a similar model. So it takes it off the tax roll from us. But at the same time, they're rehabbing the property, with LMI contractors, they're doing that work and then they want to provide a more sustainable model.
So it goes off the tax roll if you put it in the land trust.
Is not, it would only be taxed though at the value that it could be sold for. Right? So in this example,
Real
if you.
estate and property,
Mhm.
the combined value.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's something that would have to work very methodically with your assessor to make sure, because this is for the rest of the country, this is like, stuff that they were doing in the 70s, but it's never been adopted in Wisconsin. So for Wisconsin, you would be on the bleeding edge of figuring this out in suburbs. It's already been figured out in the city of Milwaukee. City of Milwaukee, there's a nonprofit called the Milwaukee Community Land Trust that has already taken title to its first property.
So one of the reasons, like, I know that we talk about the fact of like, oh, we're not going fast enough. Well, part of me is like, all right, I want to be smart and thoughtful, and there are other people who are constantly doing this. So it's, or at least right now, really for the first time.
Can I ask about behind the mobile station?
Yeah.
What is, I like
It's a
trying
little
to,
duplex, it's like a wood frame
Yeah,
upper lower.
the county,
Okay.
it's been in foreclosure for years,
okay,
finally foreclosed on, so it's in the county's hands.
got it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That just coincidentally is next door to the gas station. Oh,
Yes,
Got it.
it was a reference
Yeah,
point. I'm
okay.
sorry.
No, I was
I'm
just
such a
trying to
woman.
make
I'm like, where's
sure where that.
Turn by the
Yeah. And
large
what-
tree.
Gas station is what did it. Sorry.
Well, for us, it was all the unpaid utility bills,
Yeah.
like the $20,000 water.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, every year, like, yeah.
Looking at the two words of condo and cooperative together, could you talk a little about it sounds really exciting project down at Gordon Park or south of Gordon Park and right in, on Humboldt?
I love how you have this perception of me, Mike, that I just know about that, but I do not
I've
know
heard about
about
that,
that project.
I just heard about that. I'd love to know more about that
Yeah.
project as well.
Right, I mean, that's a whole,
it's basically the corner of Humboldt and North, right? That's what you're talking about, next to.
no, it's,
For that
it's
bad
the
guy
old,
exists. the restaurant, the barbecue restaurant.
right, but it really was an industrial site that goes way back beyond.
Oh, there's something being proposed there now?
Well, a huge
Condos, is
development.
the condos?
It's condos, a cooperative and low income. Yeah, it's a whole, the paper had a story on it this week. I
Oh,
think.
it's on Humboldt. Is that where it is?
It's right on Humboldt, yeah.
I know.
It's
what-
south of,
Yeah,
Locust and right north of Center
Okay.
on the east side of the street.
yeah, it's a big property.
It is. You don't know it. It goes way back to
Goes
the
way back.
river.
And if you include the house next door and the big lot next to that house that's somewhere to acquire,
Yeah.
it's gotta be 15 acres of land,
Oh.
probably. It's huge.
So like right now, I mean, there's a really small lot for sale on Downer, and then we have this duplex that's the county has taken, and there's a lot over on Jarvis. So could the village buy those lots? And then decide, let's put in a row house, let's put in row houses.
Yeah, I don't know how big those sites are. You'd have to have an architect look at that. And I would add to the vocabulary, you could buy it, this comment that the only reason it resonated is that it sounded like you might have some seniors that have been in Shorewood forever that might be, sympathetic to keeping Shorewood home ownership. You could actually take title to existing homes and duplexes and put those into a land trust as well. It doesn't have to be new
Who would
construction.
administer the land?
So you would have to, there's the Milwaukee Community Land Trust right now, which you could partner with to do that. Or you would have to create your own land trust to do that.
So is the county currently doing land trust properties in other suburbs?
They have a vision for doing it. I think, they take about 5 foreclosures. All the city of Milwaukee foreclosures are handled by the city. All the other municipalities in the county are handled by the county. They only take about 5 properties per year. I think they have a vision that each of their foreclosures would go into the land trust.
And I think,
But they haven't built the administrative backbone to do it yet.
I think it'd be great from a countywide perspective to promote that affordability if they did develop that model so that we could, because for each municipality to do that on a separate, it's just like we're in that mode. People won't do it because we don't have the resources, but we can partner to make that happen. So I'm just very supportive of the county.
Can I just, to be sensitive to time?
Oh, yeah,
Here.
sorry.
We got started a little late.
Yep.
And I think we usually shoot for 90 minutes, right? Where are we at?
We're at 10:10 and right, figure,
Because we still want to
One
hear
more
from
person.
Tom.
I'm done. I'm happy to stick around if there are other.
I mean, maybe we should, I know we probably have
pause and
tons of questions, but
Do you have a contact information? Do you have contact information? Can we get hold of you?
Yeah, Rebecca has it. Otherwise, it's just ideas@housingplan.org.
Ideas at housingplan.org.
So can I ask one last question?
Yeah.
So after this presentation, are we gonna kind of debrief it? Next meeting, are we gonna debrief as a group as to whether this influences or impacts our thoughts on moving forward? I'm just wondering what next steps are.
Yes.
Can we?
Yes.
Sure,
yeah.
I think that's,
And in light of the fact that we already had approved the voucher, right? We were gonna do the vouchers.
we started going in that direction. Now we're paused a little bit from that perspective because part of the group that we were looking to partner with was Milwaukee, and they just hired someone who's like focused on landlord relationships, and they were getting up to speed, and they said, hey, they're not gonna be ready. We're not gonna be ready to further communicate with you until spring of this year. So just know that those things are there. So we're,
yeah, so we really
That was
haven't
great.
advanced that other than in theory yet.
correct.
Spring is next month.
Well, let's hope,
Doesn't-
Kathy.
Some person
I'm
here.
going to guess that the
Oh,
grandfather did not say that.
Anderson, who's having his first winter.
So we don't see a near future voucher program. I mean,
I think
I think realistically, what's gonna happen is they're gonna come back like, well, you said spring, but talk to us in the fall.
Yeah.
You know how it works. I mean, they're not gonna be ready.
So one of the things that I've had to, I've had to get more patient with, because I'm not very patient when it comes to like, I wanna like check it off, get it done. Like some of the concepts that we're talking about, land trust being one of them, it's just new, right? So stuff like these concepts,
But new government things go fast.
I know, that's what I would,
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
Am I
no,
right?
sorry, that's a different.
am I right or wrong? Like, because the county is always like, okay, Rebecca,
Yeah,
Hold up a second.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of being told that.
land trusts and frankly cooperatives are new concepts to the Wisconsin market where they have been heavily adapted in other areas of the country.
And so I think at one of the presentations we found that we had 13 families that are getting vouchers right now to live in Shorewood. Would the fastest thing be to increase that?
So one of the challenges for us with vouchers is actually finding places for people to go with the voucher.
And that's the reason
Which
why,
is
so
why
this
the landlord
person,
Connection was hired by the city of Milwaukee to
Right.
develop those landlord relationships, because
because
Anyone
landlords
can
have
get
to
these vouchers
apply
now.
to be a part of
Yeah.
the program. And there is a process, there are hoops to jump through, and it's not fun. As a landlord, and most landlords in Shorewood frankly don't need to. There's no reason, if I don't own property in Shorewood, but if I did, I wouldn't need to. I've
So
got
basically,
way more
that
demand
voucher
than I
thing
need.
is something that is not gonna work. Or is that what we're saying?
Well, I think it can work. It's just a matter of, we
We're not
have to
gonna
have a
change it.
process in place to incentivize landlords to be a part of the program. Because just putting it out there on our website that it's available isn't gonna do it.
Vouchers are available to people now, like Corey, I forget how to pronounce her last.
Yeah.
But Fair Housing Council, what?
Schneider Peregrine.
Schneider Peregrine. So she will say, like, Rebecca, if you do find someone, like, tell me, I will place them, right? So people can go and get the housing credits right away. It's just that we don't have availability for those to, like,
We don't
apartments to
have enough
put those.
willing landlords.
Correct. So that's where the city of Milwaukee came into play. They've recognized that issue as well within their fabric and said, okay, we've hired someone now. You know,
I
we'll
feel like we
partner
would
with you.
almost need to hire someone or temporarily have someone either on staff or as a liaison to walk landlords through this process, because they're just not gonna do it. I mean,
And nobody from the county will help us do that.
I think that's part of what this office
Yes,
is
this is
going to
why
do
we
once
reached
they
out.
get up and running. But
And we don't wanna. I'm just saying, this land trust thing seems really on the horizon.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're 2 years into this already.
Which is, I think, so, and I'm not trying to sound overly half-full, because I know I come from that place, but like, that, so I think, I am not worried about us doing good things with these funds.
I'm not either. I'm just
It
saying.
is like the ingredients of how do we work through the best thing that's gonna be
Mhm.
well shaped for us, while not overtaxing our resources. And while I know it's frustrating that we haven't, like, I know that is gonna align. But we gotta keep leaning into it and having these discussions, and to Wes's point, you know, debriefing and say, okay, where is that at? But recognizing that I can't control other agencies working at the speed that we wanna work at.
I mean, I think maybe the best way forward is to discuss kind of where we're at in conjunction with what we heard from Teague today and figure out if we feel like we're in the same place where we were 4 months ago, now that with updated information. I think that's kind of where we're going.
I mean, I know we would all love to have something yesterday, but I also feel like the community support of making the right decision that is right for Shorewood, even if that takes longer, is more important. And even for me personally, like, I feel like that's more important than just making a decision to make a decision. And I mean, so, you know, honestly, like, I was not in love with the direction we were going. Like, to me, some of these other options feel a little bit more appropriate for Shorewood, even if it unfortunately takes longer. That doesn't help the immediate housing crisis in Milwaukee, is the only problem.
But I think, you know, Rebecca is right. I mean, you're headed in the right direction where, you know, when you look at our future, we don't know what's going to happen with our public works site, but that is a huge potential for some concepts like this to happen there. And if we want to do that, we may need as much as we have. You know, we need to like really look at that holistically instead of taking what we have and starting to do different things with it. We need to look at, we could have a big project and we could have a big success on our hands right there. And that's what I want to. I'm all in on that. I want to look at that possibility. All right.
So we also have one other speaker.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Sorry about that.
I think we would like to hear from Tom before people have to start bowing out.
Yeah,
yeah,
So,
Thank you so much. That was probably
Yeah,
really,
thank you.
really good presentation.
I didn't have a presentation.
Which is just fine, that's fine, that's fine.
But I will say this, we're the ones developing the project over here on Capitol. And as part of Pete's program, we submitted a request to do some affordable housing units there. Be subsidized by the ARPA fund. And if you can go to the slide where you show the public subsidy.
So what's your last
Further up,
Tom.
Beatty, BAADE.
Oh, yeah.
So if you look at the bottom two bullet points. Public subsidy per unit, 280, local 280, and then cost per unit of 200. Our project, 300, excuse me. Our project was originally conceived as affordable. We could not make that work. It was originally conceived as disabled housing. Went through gyrations of that, could not make that work. Worked on it for a couple of years, for a year now, finally getting in the ground. And now it's a market rate housing project built to what I'd call Shorewood standard. Our request was for, I think, nearly $500,000 of a subsidy
Per unit?
per unit. And that was because we had no other public subsidies involved in that. We didn't have tax credits, we didn't have a TIF, we didn't have anything else. And what drove that as an educational point is that we offered up units 30 years at affordable housing at $650 a month. Taxes, when we brought this up, taxes alone for that unit was a little over $500 plus inflation, right?
Yeah, so taxes, so you said operating expenses per unit was like 650, so taxes are included in operating, that's a big chunk of
They
it.
usually break them separate because they track differently and you try to get TIF to offset against it, but in the overall, that's part of it,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So
then-
you like a $650 rent per month, 500 of that is for property taxes
Approximately, I'm using round numbers
here
here.
in Shorewood.
For what we're anticipating in that building. And then there's all the other operating costs of the apartment. Housing, common area, cleaning, resurfacing, usually set aside a few $100 a year for replacement, all of those things. So when you added up the fact that we had no other subsidies, we have a building that is much more expensive than $300,000 a unit. You were basically buying that unit and pre-buying some of the buy down on the operating expense. Then the other thing you have here is in this one, you have 94 units with 20% being affordable. So that gives you 64 units to generate income to repay the investors. Whereas there, we had 39 units. We did ask for 2 units from ARPA, and then we were gonna ask for 4 units of your $2 million to set aside in that same price range. That $3 million would have gotten 6 units, but that only gives me 33 units to cover the debt and to repay the investor return. So it became a really untenable capital stack to be able to do that.
Tom, could you maybe speak to something that I think, you mentioned, you used the word Shorewood appropriate building.
Right.
I think this is important for this group to hear and maybe even anyone who might ever read our minutes. Speak to the issue of how you can build a building totally affordably versus when you're the developer and you come in and people keep adding things on that you need to do, whether it's facade, distinction of the building, all the different design features, because obviously building a square box with vinyl siding is the cheap way to do it. And then everything above that is adding to that $300,000 per unit cost. And I think this is also going to be a challenge in this community when we have a vision of what we want built versus what can be built affordably is something that maybe you could speak to as someone who just probably dealt with this over the last 2 years.
And so there's 2 pieces to it. One is driven by the market of what people that want to live in Shorewood want to have.
Right.
So you've mentioned the level of finish. The level of finish in those buildings in the building on Capitol is significantly different from the level of finish that we build in affordable housing projects. And we build a bunch of them. So hundreds and hundreds of units of both kinds, market rate and affordable housing. So the level of finish to begin with, the common area and the amenity package is very different. We have bigger, broader area, coffee bar, meeting rooms, little gym area, all kinds of things. You often have amenity and affordable that's usually a little simpler and you have more units to Teague's point before. You're really looking at 80, 90, 100 units to make these deals kind of work. And then here we have to enclose parking. Most of the affordable projects that we do have surface parking for the affordable units. That can be a $30,000, $40,000 per unit add just there. Land cost often is a premium here compared to some of the other places where sometimes and oftentimes the land can be contributed by a not-for-profit that's interested in helping develop that sort of thing. Or if you put the public utility yard in, right, you wouldn't look for a dollar amount, you're reducing the overall cost in order to build your units. And then there's the architectural detailing. We've got a significant amount of break lines in and out. We had to do recessed balconies after we went through the design review board, all of those things to make it look like a building that fits into Shorewood. All of those things added tens of thousands of dollars to those units.
Right, because you can't add architectural detail without adding cost.
Correct.
Right.
And it supports Shorewood's fortunate. You have a wonderful community. People want to be here. So it supports a beautiful building in terms of rents north of $2,000 a unit.
Thanks.
Not affordable for a lot of people, right?
Not affordable for projects that are developed from scratch unless you have significant subsidies. So you get 9% tax credit, you get 4% tax credit, you get free land, you get some other folks to do it. And the other thing that was against our project was even on the tax credit deals, we promised to provide it for 30 years, which would have been a deed restriction. On tax credit deals, even after the 15 years, they can go back and get more tax credits to help offset and rehab those buildings. In our project, we had to build up reserves because in 15 years, 20 years, I got to put a new roof on, I got to do re-siding and windows. So that was all dependent on that building. And what I would add, and it's to Teague's point exactly, it's really about mass. The size, if you're going to do a true affordable, we're really seeing it work north of 100. And then with that, there's the financing package. We have
We're just seeing north of 100.
north of 100 units in a building to get it to work. And then the financing package, we're at private financing, right? Banks are north of 7%. And then the term and the amortization is shorter, whereas a tax credit property can finance itself through bond financing through WIDA and get a 30-year guarantee for 4 years or 4% or 5%. So that structure is very different as well. To last time, I'm going to say your name one last time, Teague. To Teague's point is that you need all of those pieces together to get it to work. And small scale typically doesn't work from affordable. And you can take any one of the facts I just gave you and said, just from real estate tax position, you're not going to be able to do it to get somebody to here. Even if you can get the mortgage payment in that area, you still have all those other costs. And if you went all the way down to doing a TIF on a local house and at least just refunded that TIF back to that individual, that's a start, but it's still not going to be.
Right.
I missed, did you apply for tax credit?
We did not. Earlier we were going to, but we got information that such a small building, we probably wouldn't have won the competitives. We did look at, and remember there's two kinds of tax credits. There's competitive, which is allocated based on the scoring sheet that I'm going to say again, the boutiques. And then there's 4% that you can earn if you meet certain requirements. That we could work. Then for this particular building, by the time this all came around, you have to remember, we're already in the ground. When the village came to us and said, would you consider this one last time? And we tried to make it work. Just couldn't.
So those two tax credits, the state, right?
The state allocates those.
So the one was competitive and the other one was.
Non-competitive, they call it. And you can earn those by doing certain requirements. And just one last thing on tax credits. Do you all know how that works?
That'd probably be good. If you want to give us the.
I'm gonna give you the way I understand it, which is probably wrong, but it's close. Is that
People correct you.
tax credits are a way to replace investor equity. You apply for a project, the state says, we like your project, we're going to give you $5 million of what they call 9% tax credit. 9% is not important, that has to do with the tax code. And then the developer, what we do is we take those tax credits, they're no good to us. We turn around and we sell them to a bank or an insurance company or a local entity that has to put money back into the community. If we get 10 million, we sell them for 85 cents on the dollar. We get $8.5 million. That comes in and directly offset the cost of the project, which then the debt on the project is 25% rather than 75%. And those reduced rental rates then can support just a little bit of debt on the bottom. And the capital stack, that's what they call it, is all the money that you put in. A private deal, you have investor money and debt, very simple. On affordable housing, it's often, we have a dozen different values of money and it takes a year or two to put that together. All the different pieces and grants and applications and things.
So the tax credit's not really for, I didn't get that. So the tax credit's not for you. You're actually selling it and converting it to
Selling it
cash.
to bring cash into the deal and the bank is using it then to offset their tax.
Oh,
And-
then
And they
get some
use the
money.
difference in
Right.
bought and sold
Right.
for their
yeah, for the
tax purposes.
Yeah, so
So here-
the delta
yeah.
there is what they're getting.
Yeah.
Here's very well said. Here's a quick example. $10 million project, okay? $10 million project would be a 50-unit project. Well, not nowadays, but a 33-unit project, right? $10 million, nice round number. If you get the 9% tax credit, that means you get a $900,000 tax credit, but you get that tax credit every year for 10 years. So you have $9 million of tax credits to build a $10 million building. You take that $9 million tax credits, the general contractor doesn't accept tax credits as a form of payment. So you have to sell those tax credits and the price fluctuates, but let's say it's 90 cents on the dollar. So you now have $8.1 million to build a $10 million project. And for most intents and purposes, it works like a grant. And it's the most powerful resource in the country to build affordable housing. That's why it's so competitive. Separate from the 9% credit, there's a 4% credit, which you don't need to compete for. You just get it. But the 4% tax credit, you start to do that math, instead of a $900,000 tax credit, it's only $400,000. You get that for 10 years, that's a 4 million. You sell it for 90 cents on the dollar, it's 3 million. And so now you have a $3 million grant instead of an $8 million grant. And whatever you don't get in the grant, you essentially borrow, and then you have to charge rents to collect. And so, if you want to drive pricing down to that 650 or below, you need the 9% credit and you need to backfill, so that there's no debt on the property with TID or other resources.
So what difference does this current interest environment, what role does that play in this?
Number of factors. First, the current environment with inflation and cost of materials and development is one thing. So that's already driven that. Higher interest rates and the bond rate that the WIDO will probably start paying to finance their projects will go up as well. But I would say right now, in the short term, there's a real competitive advantage with state financing. Interest rate level is going to be less. But they keep those things very tight and well balanced, so you can't do anything. The big advantage with the WIDA financing is not so much the interest rate, it's the term. So I can guarantee a 5% loan for 30 years. Most commercial apartments get 5-year terms. So I got to refinance in 5 years or 10 years. And I'm taking that risk that the interest rate doesn't go up or that the value of the building at least goes up enough to keep me commensurate with the interest.
So that's-
And then lastly, what is happening right now, which could help affordable housing, is lots of private deals are crashing. As the interest rates have gone up, the problem that we have right now with affordable housing is only going to get worse because there are going to be far fewer units brought on in 24 and 25 because deals that used to work don't. They used to work at 5%. Now it's 7%.
So it's in the next 2 years, not that anybody can look in their crystal ball, but it's those investors who are looking for real estate investments. This is a good time. Well, not really. 'Cause
No,
Yeah.
because what happens is we're asking real estate investors to actually earn less on their money than they were a year or two ago when the interest rates were lower. And they do that. There's other benefits, that depreciation and stuff, investing in real estate. but they're not earning as much to get a deal to go, which is why deals are slowing down because investors are pulling back because nobody knows what's going to happen next and they don't know where to place their money.
And it's a bit of a correction too, because for the last 10 years,
It's been a roll.
it was, real estate was the place to be.
Yeah.
Because the money was so cheap.
Right.
And now it's become more, people say it's unprecedented, it's not unprecedented, like it's back to normal.
No.
I mean, it's basically, because I remember very
Current
distinctly 10 years ago, I had lots of 7% mortgages.
It's just the current expectation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just a mind shift a little bit.
Yeah.
For the
And
next,
that usually
like you
takes a
said, the
year or
next 2
two to
years.
wash out.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, does anyone else have any? I mean, we don't have, we're basically sort of at time. It sounds like we definitely want to have a follow-up discussion. We can do that.
Or I guess a question, with regards to a follow-up discussion is there any additional information you're looking for me to gather in order to have that discussion? Or are we coming together just to discuss?
Can we have T back again?
I'm happy to be here. So on a very serious note, so our coalition is a very big tent. And there are people that are coalition that feel very strongly that, we should be focused on integration efforts, in affordable housing. And there are other people that feel that, no, that's not the right, effort. There's no such thing as a bad neighborhood. You either invested in it or you don't. And if we invested in it, it would have good results. And so we want to be here. We want to be helpful. We don't have an agenda to push other than very clearly racial equity and homeownership, right? So if we are aligned on that value, then, we're here to offer whatever technical assistance we can. We have a ton of conversations with local foundations and national foundations, obviously on the technical assistance part of the equation, what other communities are going to do. So whenever and wherever you need us to show up, we're happy to be a part of the conversation, right?
I mean, I think that is like in seriousness. I mean, the next, I would love for us to be able to just have a conversation, but I think you're an incredible resource.
Yeah.
And having, maybe having you there or, maybe you can just call in, you don't have to actually physically be here, but, if there are questions that arise that we're like, we want to do X, like, is that even possible? Might be helpful.
Yeah, I feel like we have done a great job of all learning the last 2 years. And every time we have one of these meetings, I learn a ton of new stuff. I also feel, and I also feel like there's so many irons that just got put in the fire. Like, we don't know how some of this stuff is going to shake out. Cooperatives, land trusts, vouchers. And because,
Your yard.
well, and because we are what we are here in Shorewood, a small community, it's tough for us to pick any direction. I keep coming back to the fact that I think part of the reason why we can't or haven't done anything is because we really can't do anything on our own. We really need to rely on whatever the bigger entities surrounding us decide is going to happen. Like, if land trusts become a thing that people figure out over the next 48 months, then we'll probably be able to do that. Or if
And
we,
can Shorewood do that themselves?
well,
I mean, can we figure out our own land trust situation, or we really want to see what happens here before we decide?
it's a resource issue,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
right, yeah, that's the thing, it's committee capacity, it's my mind capacity, everyone here has other things to do, right? We don't just go home and study fair housing and affordable housing thing. I don't have the time. I think it's interesting, but I've got a life to live and everyone else does too. So I know.
One action that I think we could take is to provide that recommendation to the board to extend every future TID by 1 year. Just selfishly, because we run pro forma, right? We're always running pro forma up here. And so I think, like, if we could just, from a policy perspective, make that recommendation. So that we could continue to fuel, like, I think we've acknowledged, like, this isn't gonna happen overnight, but we're going about it in a really thoughtful way. Board, can you please, moving forward, extend the TIDs by 1 year for purposes of affordable housing to assist in the effort?
So if each TID is extended by a year, like what is the dollar value that would?
Each one's different, right? Because each TID is different.
Mhm.
So it would be that last year of increment.
Sure,
But none of them are as big as the one that just closed.
right.
That was my question.
Right.
Yeah.
One was 2 million and it was basically the corridors, Oakland and Capitol,
Right.
minus the Light Horse, minus Metro, and minus the Oaks.
I mean, I would,
So they're gonna be much smaller.
but I would love to see what that, to say that, I think I need a little bit more information. I'm
Yeah,
not
I
opposed to
actually
it. I
have
would
the
love to
entire
know.
memos. I'll just pull it up and
Okay,
share that again.
before making that recommendation, I would just really like to know, what are those dollar amounts and what does, what does that?
They're whatever they're gonna be at today.
Okay.
Just because that's what,
At today, right.
right. And then tea, do you like coffee or tea? What are things that you like so we can have them here to bring you?
Openness to racial equity is also all that I ask for.
Okay,
And
all
that's, and I definitely see that in the work that you guys are doing.
And so just a question about the property at Capitol and Oakland on the southeast corner, which is a big piece of real estate.
Right.
Which, I'm sorry, which
The
one?
southeast
The tall
corner
building.
of,
Okay.
And then the land behind it.
and
With all the.
Right.
The roller coaster.
used to be North Shore Bank, it's orthopedic.
Oh, yeah, right.
And then, so they have that whole
Yeah, they have
piece now, right? They have
Yeah.
like, there's like 2 parking lots or 3 parking lots. There's the
The
really
office
tall
building.
building and there's the Ascension building, but there's one little apartment building that's not owned by them, right?
Right.
And so I know we're talking a lot about public works. What about commercial real estate too? I mean, is it worth trying? I mean, they were
Great point.
They're open-minded, those developers, they're very.
Control of that site, obviously, but
Sorry, say that again?
we have less control over that site. It's privately owned, but they have been willing to discuss ideas with us. It's Dominion property, so.
Yeah. They're open to a lot of.
I'm just thinking, if you want density and you want easy access to public transportation, to stores,
Schools.
to restaurants, to the library,
Zoning allows more height in that block.
it's right there.
They were gonna work with on affordable housing with that program to bring in,
They were disabled. people for a
disabled,
while, right?
yeah.
Right, and that,
unfortunately, but that was,
I don't know why that fell through.
yeah, I don't know. I never got the details on that one. It's unfortunate because that was gonna be a big,
Yeah.
I thought that was gonna be a big win for them, but they're open-minded. So I think, bringing that into a
To
conversation.
Kathy's point, it's always good to have conversations frequently with people because things change, right? They're differently than with our group, so perhaps maybe not with the next one, but maybe the future when we invite them in to have a conversation. Share with them, I guess, what we're looking at.
And I think when they first bought that site, they were really looking to the building on the corner to be affordable housing. But they, looked at it and said, it just is really hard to use it for anything but the office. And so, they put all the solar panels on it, which was fantastic. But it's,
The inside is looking
They've
great.
done so much remodeling.
Oh my gosh.
too. Yeah.
It's like night and day.
I'd be interested to know too, like, since COVID, how has that changed? Because I don't know how,
Yeah.
with changing in office
Right.
space demands, are they still
A
able
lot of
to?
dentists.
I know.
My
Dentist is-
dentist is in there.
Minus-
I know, me too.
That's good.
And new ones coming in.
and doctors, right? Well, orthopedic use.
well, I think what surprised me when they bought it, it already was at 80% occupancy,
Yeah, right.
which I thought it was like a vacant building.
So right.
Yeah, but they said, no, it already was 80, so,
Location.
yeah, exactly, bus line.
So I'm gonna draw us back to the details of our next meeting. Typically, not that I mean, I only. People expect me to do that.
Absolutely.
Steve, what would your availability be on Friday, March 3rd? Also saying that out loud for the group. Because it's so much easier to do this with all of you here.
I actually won't be clear. I will be gone, but that doesn't mean the meeting can't happen.
I'm completely clear that day too.
It's fantastic.
I know, I got like a sea of things, but
That's a good day for me.
It's a
I
good thing
just
to-
have one appointment, but I can move it.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Okay, because remember, we want to be completely flexible with you.
Yeah, I can happily move it. The 10th works better, but the 3rd is totally fine.
Yeah, I can do that.
The 10th is harder for me, but
I can do the 10th, but not the.
I can do the 10th for an hour. But
Okay.
Assuming we start at
We
9.
could start a little earlier.
We could start earlier.
Hard for me to start. I mean, I'd have to be a little late, so I got all this stuff and kids to school and like dog and gotta do this whole thing in the morning, so
Okay.
I
You
would
mean
not.
like 8:30? No,
Might be easier for me to stay a little later. Again, I can make it work for an hour. I can see maybe that meeting will cancel out, so I don't leave, but why don't we leave it at 9?
Okay.
So we're talking March 10 at 9 AM.
What a good morning. Well, we need an adjournment.
Wait, do we-
There's consider the receipt of annual update for the Shorewood Housing Affordability Report.
Oh, yeah, that was in the pack.
Yeah,
Yeah, it really is. So, this is something that's
I
required
feel
by
like I
state
did this
statutes.
forever ago.
I move to
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
I move to consider the receipt of the annual update to the Village of Shorewood Housing Affordability Report.
I will second that.
All right, all in favor?
I,
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sometimes, you know, it's like, we put the packets down, and we spend so much time getting it there, and then you're like, oh, it's done.
I meant to ask at the beginning what that was.
It happens every year, always in January.
Okay.
It's a requirement of the state. We started doing it at the conclusion of our our updated housing
Right.
analysis.
Yeah.
And now it comes back every year, and then we also post it on our website, so the village board will receive it at their next meeting. Or they already did.
They did on Monday, correct?
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
Oh, yes.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody.
Good time. What a good morning.
You have 2 seconds?
Sure,
Yes.
I might have more than 2 seconds.
2 minutes.
Remember, lost a coat that one was on.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, there's a.
coat? Yes.
Yes, it's been in my office for like a year and I.
Oh, I'm wondering who the phone is like.
wearing for winter. Do you really?
I have
been racking my brain. Where, like in March, and I emailed around and no one ever responded and I was like.
Yeah.
I even accused
my ex-girlfriend of throwing it away.
And that's why she's your ex-girlfriend?
I left the winter jacket, like I think I left it, no, I'm